Ok, muy bien. Muchísimas gracias por estar aquí. Es un gusto pues, presentar al doctor Yitzhac Melamed. Él es profesor de la Universidad Johns Hopkins y es doctor en filosofía por la Universidad de Yale. Bueno, es un especialista en Spinoza. Entre los títulos de sus libros, bueno, escritos en inglés, es La metafísica de Spinoza, Sustancia y Pensamiento. Está también estos libros que se hacen para acompañar la lectura de un autor, pues él hizo el de Blackwell Companion, ¿no? Para Spinoza. Ha hecho también un libro sobre el tratado político de Spinoza, una guía para la lectura. También ha hecho este está con Cambridge. Ha hecho igual una guía crítica para la ética de Spinoza, también con Cambridge. Y bueno, pues, su bibliografía es enorme y muy extensa. Y bien, well, we are really thankful, Yitzhac, for you to be here. And, bueno, nos va a presentar esto. Vamos a poder tener, gracias a Rafa Muñiz, que anda por ahí. ¿Dónde anda Rafa? Todavía, bueno, está por llegar Rafa. Él hizo las traducciones de las transparencias y todo. Entonces le agradecemos mucho a Rafa, agradecemos muchísimo a Víctor también todas las gestiones para que pudiera estar aquí Yitzhac. So, Yitzhac, it's all yours. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, thank you so much, Luis. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank the organizers for the wonderful conference and also for inviting me. It's my first time in Mexico, in fact, the first time in Latin America. So it's a great pleasure and I'm really excited about this opportunity. The paper I'm going to present here is prepared for this conference. I never presented it before. I presented similar ideas in a slightly different way. But basically, the main claims of this paper are going to be presented here for the first time. I'm not saying that because I'm going to defend myself as saying that, okay, let me walk out. No, please just jump with as many questions as you can. I'll present the paper, I'll give you an outline, and then I'll be extremely grateful for any comments, questions, criticism, or anything. Okay. So, the title is Spinoza's Infinite Multiverse. If I may, I might even try to coin a term, infiverse. Right? Not universe, not even multiverse. I would say that Spinoza's is really an infiverse, and I'll explain that at the very last point, at the very end of the talk. So, what I'll do is I have 4 sections, really. The first section is just a very brief explanation of what we mean when we're speaking about multiverse. I think most of the things that you will hear there are quite familiar to you. I don't expect any kind of great news about that. Still, just to have a common ground and give you definitions of what we understand by multiverse, I would be happy to do that. Then the second part, which is the core of the paper, will address the Spinoza-Tschirner correspondence from 1675. It's 4 letters, 63 to 66, and we'll read them carefully. I think that's the core of the text that interests me. The third part will add a few texts, one from Spinoza's short treatise, from the second appendix to the short treatise, and then the second one from the notes that Leibniz prepares for himself after meeting Spinoza for a day or 2, and I think some of these notes are also very helpful for our purposes. The fourth and last point will try to give some motivation or present some motivation for this view of reality as an infiverse, okay? And I'll try to connect it to a broader view, which I ascribe to Spinoza, which I call anti-humanism. I'm working now on the book of Spinoza's anti-humanism. Some chapters of this book already appeared, and I hope to complete it within a year or 2, so we'll see. So that's basically the plan, and let's begin the work. So, okay. So the term multiverse appeared at the end of the 19th century. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the first use of the term is recorded in 1897. And it is a quite common term that you find in science fiction and theoretical physics. I'm not an expert on either one, but still, I think it's an interesting notion. And in order to, again, to create some sort of common ground, I would like to share with you two definitions, one from the cheapest, the dirt cheap dictionary, Merriam-Webster dictionary, and the most academic high dictionary, the Oxford English Dictionary. So you get the range. Let's have a quick look at what we understand by a multiverse. So the Merriam-Webster say a theoretical reality that includes a possibly infinite number of parallel universes. I don't know why they speak about parallel universes. Let's put that aside. They insist that there are possible universes. I think parallel possible universes or multiverses is an interesting view, but the view that I'm going to ascribe to Spinoza is crazier. It's not that there are infinite many possible universes. There are infinitely parallel actual universes, not merely possible, right? It's a stronger claim in some sense. And of course, when you come with a question of universes in the plural, one of the main questions will be, well, what are the boundaries between one universe and another? Is there a wall between one universe and another? What is there? How do you make a boundary between one universe and another? When you're speaking about possible universes, this kind of problem is less acute because they are we're speaking about possibilities rather, and it seems that in some way, just by the virtue of the modal grammar, we can speak about different possible universes. When you're speaking about actual universes, the story is getting more urgent, becoming more urgent. Luckily, I think Spinoza actually has a very good answer about the wall, about the boundary between the universes, and we're going to explore it in 2-3 minutes. Okay. Now, the Oxford English Dictionary has the definition, the following definition. So it's basically telling you that the term has one meaning in science fiction, another one in physics. The science fiction meaning a hypothetical space or realm of being consisting of a number of universes, of which our own universe is only one. I think that actually goes very well with what I'll argue. And then in contemporary physics, the large collection of universes in the many-world interpretation of quantum mechanics, according to which every event at the quantum level gives rise to a number of parallel universes, which each in turn of the possible outcomes occurs. So, in the case of the quantum mechanics interpretation, you seem to have here again the modality of possibility rather than actuality. I'm not an expert, again, I'll stress that I'm not an expert in quantum cosmology. I do read it. I subscribe to Scientific American. I read some materials in contemporary popular physics. And at least my impression is that there are actually interesting discussions of multiverses or multiverse in contemporary cosmology, going even beyond the quantum mechanics, etc. But I'll put that aside. Again, that's just one source of inspiration. In this paper, I will argue that Spinoza's ontology consists of an infinite multiverse, namely an infinite plurality of parallel, and I will stress actual universes, each of which is infinite in its own realm. This is a notion of multiverse that has many commonalities, but also some significant differences with current discussions of the multiverse in cosmology. A question that haunts theories of an actual universe is what marks the boundary between one universe and another. And here Spinoza has an extremely simple and elegant answer. the conceptual and causal barrier between the attributes, and in half a second, we're going to see them. We're going to see Spinoza's claims. We are going to understand why he creates, what is this nature of barrier between the universes, and I'll be happy to discuss it as well. So here's the version, the Spanish version of the text. And move next. So, 1675, we have this kind of super interesting correspondence between Spinoza and Tschirnaus. The correspondence begins with a letter that Georg Schuler is sending to Spinoza, in which he conveys certain objections, or in Schuler's words, doubts that were raised by their common friend Erfried von Tschirnhaus. Now, Tschirnhaus is a super smart guy, understudied to my mind, and really one of the most interesting, perhaps I think the sharpest of Spinoza's critics or Spinoza's correspondence. And here's what Tschirnaus, or what Schuler is writing to Spinoza in the name of Tschirnaus. So the first objection is the following. So here's the words: would you please, sir, convince us by some probative demonstration, not by a reduction to an impossibility, that we cannot know more attributes of God than thought and extension? Right? Because we know, remember, the ethics begins with the definition of God as having infinitely many attributes. Then you have axiom 5 of part 2 that is telling you that we cannot know anything about any other attributes apart from extension and thought, or modes of extension and thought. And for most of the ethics, Spinoza is silent, not completely silent. I'll mention one place where Spinoza is going back to this question of the unknown attributes. But for the most of the time, Spinoza is silent about the other attributes. And so the interesting question is, well, why don't you tell us anything about these infinitely many unknown attributes? If we don't know them, why don't we know them? So let's look again. I'm going back to the text of Schuler Tschirnaus. Furthermore, he's saying, does it follow from this that in contrast to us, creatures consisting of those other attributes cannot conceive extension? I'll explain in half a minute. In this way, it would seem that there must be as many worlds established as there are attributes of God. For example, our world of extension, right, has, so to speak, a certain size. Size meaning, it is infinite in its kind, right? Would there also be a world of the same size consisting of other attributes in which, as we perceive nothing besides extension except thought? So our world is constituted by extension and its representation in thoughts. The creatures of those worlds, with the other attributes, would have to perceive nothing but the attribute of their own world and thought. So that's basically the picture. I think is actually a very nice and very elegant picture, according to which what you have is you have one substance, infinitely many attributes, and you can also, one way to parse the world of Spinoza's reality, or to parse the reality of Spinoza, is basically of pairs of one attribute, one non-thought attribute, and its representation in thought. And every time you have such a pair, you have a separate world. So that's a picture that you get according to the view of Tschirnaus and Schuler. Okay, it's more Tschirnaus, of course. I'll to read quickly the Spanish. Okay. So here's Spinoza's response. It's letter 64. And Spinoza is having a series of responses. The first one is, so he begins with a response to the first doubt. So now to the doubts, says Spinoza, to the first, they say that the human mind can achieve knowledge only of the things which the idea of an actually existing body involves, or what can be inferred from this idea itself. So again, what the idea of the human body involves and what can be inferred from that. The idea of the human body is, of course, the mind. And in a minute, we will see that Spinoza is citing E2P13, where Spinoza is arguing that the idea of the human mind is nothing but an idea of a finite, actual mode of extension, right? Now, let's, and Spinoza is mentioning here what can be inferred from this idea. So pay attention to the word inferred because wait a minute. Yeah, because it is quite interesting. We'll get to that in half a second. So, for the power of each thing, meaning what we can or cannot do, is defined solely by its essence, and for the essence of the mind consists only in this, that it is an idea of an actually existing body. So what the human mind can do is just defined by its essence, meaning the fact that it is an idea of an actually existing body. Therefore, the mind's power of understanding extends only to those things which the idea of the body contains in itself, or which follow from it. Okay. Keep the reference to what follows from it. I think it's related to what can be inferred, or probably pretty much the same. But this idea of the body, meaning the human mind, this idea of the body neither involves nor expresses any other attribute of God than extension in thought, right? Because that's what the human idea is. It's an idea of a body. 4 by 2p6, in a minute we'll talk about it, but 2p6 is the causal barrier between attributes. For its object, that is the body, has God for a cause insofar as it is considered under attribute of extension, and not insofar as it is considered under any other attribute. So I'll let you look. And what we're going to do in the next 10-15 minutes is just to spell out as clear as possible what Spinoza is saying here. We haven't helped because Chernoff is not satisfied with the answer of Spinoza, and he asked Spinoza for further clarification. I think Spinoza provides a perfect explanation to my mind, so I'll be able to defend it. Okay. Now let's continue with this very same explanation of Spinoza. So again, it's all the response in letter 64. Saying next, this idea, meaning the idea of the body, okay, the mind or the idea of the body, insofar as it is a mode of thinking, also by the same proposition, meaning proposition 6 of part 2, has God for a cause insofar as it is a thinking thing, and not insofar as it is considered under another attribute. It is evident then that the human mind, or the idea of the human body, neither involves nor expresses any other attribute of God besides these two, meaning extension and thought, right? So the idea can express, insofar as it is an idea of a body, it can express, it can represent the body. Insofar it is also an idea, and it can have an idea of an idea, you can have also knowledge of thought. Moreover, no other attribute of God by proposition 10 of part 1 can be inferred or conceived from these two attributes, or from their affections, meaning the modes. So I conclude that the human mind cannot achieve knowledge of any other attribute of God beyond these, as I proposed. But, you ask, in addition, whether this must not establish as many worlds as there are attributes. To this, Spinoza has typically, a very brief and enigmatic answer. See Part 2, Ethics, Part 2, Proposition 7, Scholium. That's the entire answer with regard to the worlds. So what does Spinoza mean by all this? So let's first of all look at the two doctrines which are central to Spinoza's response. The first one is proposition 10 of part 1, where Spinoza argues that each attribute must be conceived through itself. The argument relies on the fact that an attribute supposed to constitute the essence of substance, or perceived by the intellect as constituting the essence of substance, and insofar as a substance is self-conceived, so too must an attribute be self-conceived, right? E1P10 then establishes what we can call the conceptual barrier between the attributes. Okay? Then later, in part 2, in proposition 6 of part 2, Spinoza established not only a conceptual barrier between the attributes, but also a causal barrier between the attributes. In order to do that, he relies on the conceptual barrier between the attributes, meaning proposition 10 of part 1, and axiom 4 of part 1, which is a kind of bridge between causation and conception, showing that if there is no conceptual relation between two items, there cannot be also a causal relation between them. And as a result, we have in E2P6 the causal barrier between the attributes, which means that modes of different attributes cannot causally interact with each other. And again, they also cannot conceptually be related to each other. Now, before we move ahead, a simple question which we should ask ourselves is, does Spinoza accept Chernyav's suggestion that each non-thought attribute and its representation in thought constitute a separate world? And my impression, I'm open to discussion on that, is that Spinoza's answer is, I think the best way to use it is you have a word in German called Jein, which is between nein and ja. Jein means yes and no. So, and I think that what Spinoza is saying there is the following, saying, first of all, there is one reality. There is just one reality, and all of these things are related to one underlying reality. Second, yes, you have this kind of separation. You have a regime of a causal and conceptual separation between each of the attributes and its representation in thought. That's part of the genuine architecture of this universe. Okay? I would argue that this kind of architecture of one unity, of unity on the one hand, and this kind of infinite plurality of separate realms that are causally and conceptually independent from each other constitutes something very, 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 very similar to what we find today in discussions about multiverses. Okay. Now, is Chernyv happy with his response? No, and still, because he's surprised and he's asking Spinoza in letter 65, and he's asking for simply, well, you just sent me to Scholium proposition 7 of part 2, so please tell me how you understand that. Literally, that's his response. Tell me, what do you mean by that? I'm sorry, it's a long Scholium, a full page of Spinoza can have, infinite number of ideas almost. I mean, perhaps I'm exaggerating with infinite, but a lot of ideas. So tell me precisely what you mean by this Scholium. It's a long Scholium. So here's what Spinoza is answering. Well, first of all, here's the question. And Chernyv is saying, that modification which constitute my mind and that modification which constitute my body, although it is one of the same modification, is nevertheless expressed in infinite ways. In one way through thought, in another way through extension, in a third way through an attribute of God unknown to me, and so to infinity, right? So there are infinitely many modes which are parallel to my body, identical to my body, and yet I have no idea what they are doing. In some sense, I have no idea what I'm doing in all of these attributes, right? I mean, they are identical to me. What's precisely going on there? The question arises, why the mind, which represents a certain modification, and which same modification is expressed not only in extension, but also in infinite other ways, why, I ask, does the mind perceive only that modification which is expressed through extension, that is, the human body, and no other expression through other attributes? Now, it's a super interesting and adequate question, right? Because the point is, my mind is an idea of my body. My mind knows my body. My body is identical with most of other attributes. I have no idea what they're doing. Why? I mean, it's very nice for Spinoza to say that we cannot know, right? I mean, that's what he's saying in Axiom 5 of Part 2. But, Spinoza is not someone that you should say, well, the master said so, therefore we cannot know. If he has an argument, if he thinks that you cannot know, please provide us an argument, right? Just saying that we cannot know, it's very nice, but it's not philosophy, just a statement, right? And so the objection is absolutely in place, and Spinoza, fortunately, has a perfect answer to that. So let's look at that. So here's Spinoza's answer. To reply to your objection, I say that although each thing is expressed in infinite ways in the infinite intellect of God, nevertheless, those infinite ideas in which it is expressed cannot constitute one and the same mind of a singular thing, but infinitely many minds. I'll explain that in half a second. Since each of these infinite ideas has no connection with any other, as I have explained in the same scholium, that of E2P7, and as is evident from E1P10. So Spinoza is invoking, again, the conceptual separation of the attribute in proposition 10, and then the parallelism, the parallelism between the attribute. The parallelism between ideas and things, but whatever. Now, what precisely is he saying here? Why there is no connection between my mind and the other mind that is parallel to my mind, that is representing the mode of the third attribute? The answer is very simple. So here's a simple explanation of why we cannot know. Spinoza's argument in letter 66 is very, very simple. He's saying, if there were a connection, conceptual connection between ideas of modes of different attributes, there would be, according to proposition 7 of Part 2, a connection between the ideata of these ideas. So let's suppose that my mind and the mind of the mode of the third attribute are somewhat connected. You can infer one from the other. There is some sort of conceptual connection between them. Right? According to the idea-things parallelism, there should be the same thing should also be with the ideata of these ideas. So that would mean that there would be a connection between a mode of extension and a mode of the third attribute. But Spinoza is saying it is impossible that there will be a connection between modes of extension and modes of the third attribute because they belong to different attributes and therefore they cannot have any kind of causal or conceptual connection between them. Therefore, we'll say there cannot also be any kind of conceptual connection between ideas representing modes of different attributes. So what you get here is in fact a third barrier. In addition to the barrier that you have between, in addition to the causal barrier that you have between the attributes or among the attributes, and the conceptual barrier between the attributes, you have a similar barrier, a parallel barrier within thought. Ideas representing modes belonging to different attributes cannot have any kind of causal or conceptual interaction between them. Why? Because if there were, then pair the idea-things parallelism of proposition 7 of Part 2, their ideata will have to have the same thing. They will also be connected. Now, Spinoza seems to have actually a perfect answer to the question why we cannot know any other attribute. Well, because of the parallelism between ideas and things, and because things belonging to different attributes cannot have causal and conceptual connection. Therefore, ideas or minds of different attributes are in precisely the same situation. They cannot have any kind of causal and conceptual connection with minds of different attributes. Now, There is one more interesting point that I would stress here, and that's the argument that Spinoza brings here actually is making axiom 5 of part 2 redundant. Because axiom 5 in part 2 is saying that it's presented as an axiom, right? And he's saying that we neither feel nor sense anything from natura naturata apart from bodies and minds. Here, it's not anymore an axiom. You have an argument for that, right? So if we were right now, I think we can rewrite, or if you wish, correct Spinoza's ethics. I mean, right now you should have something like proposition 7 prime, which would be just a claim that it's not that we happen not to know, that it's not that we cannot, it's not an axiom that we do not know the other attributes. It's simply impossible. And here's the proof, here's the argument. It's a simple argument, very elegant, relying on proposition 10 of part 1 and proposition 7 of part 2. Okay? This process in which axioms turn into propositions is, by the way, quite common in Spinoza. I mean, I can give you several other examples where certain texts, certain claims were originally presented as axioms, and after some work, Spinoza understands that actually you don't need to present them, you can prove them. Once you can prove them, they stop being axioms, they are just propositions. Okay. So I'll let you just have one more quick look at the argument if you're interested. So what is the grand picture we have? The grand picture we get is of infinite many ontological units. Each unit is constituted by an attribute and its representation in thought. So each unit is infinite, its representation in thought itself is infinite. And these ontological units are, here are 4 features that I would ascribe to these infinite units. They are causally independent from each other, right? That's the E2P6. They are conceptually independent from each other. That's E1P10, right? They are causally isomorphic. That's the parallelism between the attributes of E2P7 scolium. And finally, they are in some weaker sense, they are identical to each other. I'm saying in some weaker sense because the identity at stake, it's not what we would call diagonal identity that the thing has only to itself. And it's not an identity in which you can have salve veritate, flip of terms, right? I mean, you cannot use the terms thinking substance and extended substance. You cannot flip the terms and stay with the same truth value of the term. The thinking substance is extended, is false, right? The extended substance is extended, is true. Right? So the salve veritate does not work in this case. I think it's a longer story, but I think that we have in Spinoza a genuine notion of identity that is slightly weaker than strict diagonal identity. What is Spinoza is using the terminology of identity, even in cases where you don't have strict diagonal identity. Okay. Now, so far, I've been presenting just this correspondence between Spinoza and Chirinhouse. You may say, listen, it's bizarre views of Spinoza in the letters. That's, for example, Jonathan Bennett at some point saying, we don't understand what Spinoza is saying there. It's a bizarre claims in the late letters. He never said anything like that in any other places. That's nonsense. So let's see a few places where Spinoza is saying very, very similar claims in other works. So here's the text. The text I'm referring to right now is the second, the so-called second appendix to the short treatise. In a separate paper I published a few years ago, I argued that the first appendix is in fact the first draft of the ethics that we currently have. It's an early draft, it's written more geometrical, with axioms, no definitions. And I think it's Spinoza's earliest attempt, or the earliest attempt we currently have before our eyes of an attempt to write more geometrical. I'll be happy to explain why I made this conclusion. The second appendix to the short treatise is in fact related to it's a short text, but it's related to what is happening in part 2 of the Ethics. And here's the claims that you have in this second appendix. So saying the essence of the soul, that the text is in Dutch, then Zu, consists only in the being of an idea. That's what an idea is. It's just, that's what a soul or a mind is. It's just an idea, or objective essence in the thinking attribute, arising from the essence of an object which in fact exists in nature. The term arising here is problematic because it might indicate some kind of causation. I think Spinoza will never make similar claims in his mature work, but here, again, it's an early text, and in the early text of Spinoza, we find occasionally some violations of the barrier between the attributes, for example. This is one of them. I can refer you to quite a few others. Now pay attention to the words. I say of an object that really exists without further particulars, in order to include here not only modes of extension, but also the modes of all the infinite attributes, which have a soul just as much as those of extension do. So, modes of the third attribute have a soul, have a mind. Modes of the fourth attribute have a soul, have a mind. Precisely the same picture that we have seen before. This is why we have used these words in the definition, that the soul is an idea arising from an object which exists in nature, and with this we consider that we have sufficiently explained what kind of thing the soul is in general. Meaning it's an idea of a mode. Understanding by this expression not only the ideas that arise from corporeal modes, but also those that arise from the existence of each mode of the remaining attributes. Okay? So you have infinitely many attributes. Each of these infinitely many attributes that are represented in thought. It's a very, very similar picture. One other, so you can see it here in the Spanish. One other text which I would like to share with you, which again, going in the very same direction, is taken from the notes that Leibniz prepares after meeting Spinoza for a day or two. I'm not sure, I think it's 2 days, I'm not sure. And after this meeting, Leibniz inscribes for himself the following sentences, saying he, meaning Spinoza, thinks that there are infinite other positive attributes besides thought and extension. But in all of them there is thought, as in this world there is in extension. What they are like is not conceivable by us. Everyone is infinite in its own kind, like space in this world. I'll stress that the translation here, it's not mine. The translation is by Pollock. I think that many other figures try. The translation here is making the case for my interpretation, but based on an imprecise translation. Because what Spinoza is saying in this world, there is no reference to mundus. Simply here, in ours, saying we have extension and its representation in thought. In the other worlds, again, you have other attributes and their representation in thought. Okay, so the appearance of the last time, like space in this world, here the world is it's not a literal translation. I'm stressing that. Okay, I can see why the person is moved to that, but whatever. Now, if you ask yourself, is there any place in the ethics where Spinoza is referring to the other worlds? Yes, there is. It's one place. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny place. But if you read it, you'll see that there is no chance that you can explain this text in any other way but by a reference to the minds of the modes of the other attributes. And these texts appear in proposition 13 of part 2, where Spinoza is concerned about a very specific thing. He's concerned about the possibility that an idea, that my mind, by mistake, instead of picking my body, will pick another mode of another attribute, okay? Probably of the mode of one of the parallel attribute, one of the parallel modes to my body. Now, how do I know that? Because he cites, in order to prove that, he cites E2A5, right? E2A5 is the claim that we do not know anything but extension and thought, that we have no knowledge of any other any modes of any other attribute apart from modes of extension and modes of thought. So the reference to E2A5 makes clear that the mismatch that E2P13 is concerned about, is worried about, is a mismatch. It's not a mismatch that instead of taking my body, it can take the body of a turtle. Rather, it's a mismatch of instead of taking my mind taking my body, it will take a mode of the third attribute instead. Okay? You can also ask another question: why is Spinoza not saying anything about the other attributes? And there are two simple answers. First of all, he thinks that you cannot know anything about it. That's first, if you do not know something about the issue, remain silent, right? I mean, that's the old Wittgensteinian advice. But there is another simple reason. If you remember the preface or at the beginning of part 2 of the Ethics, Spinoza is telling you that, listen, we are about to have a huge zoom in the book, right? Because part 1 of the Ethics was dealing with the general infrastructure, the general outline of the entire metaphysics of Spinoza, the entire universe. What happens at the beginning, in the preface to part 2, is where Spinoza is saying, from now onwards, I'm going to focus only on those things which are related to the human mind and its salvation. The other attributes are not relevant here. Now, we can imagine that there are some creatures in the other attributes that are probably writing their version of the ethics, and that would be different, right? But for us, the salvation of the other attributes simply are not, even if we could know them, they would most likely not be relevant to our story. Okay. So, now, one question you can ask is that why is Spinoza so confident about these infinitely many other attributes? Though, why he's not simply saying, perhaps there are other attributes. But that's not what he's saying. He's absolutely confident that there are other attributes. He defines God as a substance having infinitely many attributes, not possibly infinite, not perhaps, very strict. There is no indication in any of the discussion of the infinity of attributes where Spinoza says, perhaps there are infinitely many attributes. Simply out of the picture. It's not there. And I think that there is a very nice passage, which I came to see only very recently, that I think can give you some explanation. I think in addition to the fact that, yes, Spinoza's understanding of God is absolutely infinite, is super important for him. It's a long tradition of that. I'm absolutely appreciative of that and supportive of this view, but I think there is also another line which is happening. So let's read together this interesting short passage from the short treatise. They tell of a peasant who deluded himself into thinking that outside his field there were no others. One day he missed one of his cows and he had to go far away in the search of her. He was astonished that outside his own small farm there were so very many others. Many philosophers must also be like that. They have deluded themselves into thinking that beyond this plot of ground or little globe on which they are, there is nothing more because they have seen nothing else. And Spinoza simply is saying, I'm done with the illusions of anthropocentrism. I mean, I think that one of the deepest elements in Spinoza's philosophy is the attempt to criticize both anthropomorphism and anthropocentrism, the view that the world is dancing around us. The fact that I don't know some parts of the world is not necessarily just my world. The world can be, and Spinoza will in fact say, is way beyond me, way beyond anything I can understand. So what you have, again, if I understand it correctly, what you have a universe, or if you wish, an infiverse, right? In which our world, or our universe of extension and its representation of thought, just a tiny fracture, you wish, just one aspect. It's a very modest view of human beings, right? You are not anymore the center of the universe. The limits of your knowledge are not the limits of what is possible to know, because there are other creatures who know whatever you cannot know. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your conference. It was really, really interesting. So now we pass to the questions and answers. Preguntas que tengan ustedes. El texto en español estaban las traducciones de algunos de los pasajes que vimos y pues preguntas que tengan, que quieran comentar.
So I was wondering about your reconstruction of Spinoza's argument in his response to Turnhouse. And I take it that Turnhouse was wondering, well, first wondering if there's lots of worlds, each one corresponding to an attribute. And Spinoza first refers him to the scoring of Proposition 7 in Part 2, which I take to the relevant part of that is to be the assertion of identity between modes of thought and modes of extension, which suggests to me that he's saying to Turnhouse, no, there aren't many worlds. There's one world. Modes of thought and modes of extension are identical to one another. They're one and the same thing, conceived of in two different ways. And then your idea that no, there are sort of like unto many worlds, and they're causally isolated from one another. I think that's not fully supported by what Spinoza writes, because he says only that there's no connection between the business, there's no causal connection, and in particular he refers Turnhouse to Proposition 10, Part 1, where Spinoza does not assert that there's no causal connection between the attributes. Rather, he says there's no conceptual connection. And that to me more strongly suggests that the distinction, although they're numerically identical, the modes of thought and extension and the other attributes, there's a conceptual distinction, or a distinction of reason between them, not that they're constituting the whole universe.
Okay, Martin, I agree with much of what you said in one place. So yes, I think that what you're saying about the identity is part of what Hopkins answered. I absolutely agree with that. And I think that there is one underlying reality, so it's reason. But the connection is not necessarily a conceptual connection. Remember for the formulation of Utopia 7, the ordered connection of ideas is the same as the ordered connection of things. I think that's what the connection is. I mean, see what are the contexts in which connects you or period. That's precisely the context of say. I think it's the connection which is both of ideas, conceptual barrier, and of things.
But how does that order and connection create distinct worlds? So the order and connection of things is the same as the order and connection of ideas. That doesn't say that they don't causally interact. That comes from Proposition 6 and Proposition 5. And then in the Scholium, he corrects himself. He says, I only said they didn't causally interact because of these explanatory considerations.
No. Wait. I mean, the causal, Utopia 7 is telling you that the order of ideas, the connection of ideas should be the same as the connection of their objects, right? We know from Utopia 6 that the objects cannot causally interact.
Or he only said that because.
He's saying that. He took a states very explicitly. He's saying objects of different attributes cannot causally interact.
He clarifies it in the Scholium to 7.
The what?
He clarifies what he meant by that in the Scholium to 7.
He does not even. I don't see where I don't see where he clarifies it. When he's saying that there is no connection, and that the connection of ideas parallels the connection of their objects, seems to be saying the same structure, the same isomorphism which you have in the objects is also reflected in thought, right? And if there is no connection between objects of different if there is no connection between modes of different attributes, there should also be no connection between ideas or minds of different attributes. Now, whether this connection between minds, you spell it out in terms of causal or perceptual, I think it's a fair question. But I think that's precisely the term connection is doing.
La traducción.
Pero es que vamos, sí, no sé, quieren pues que habrá que traducir toda la ponencia. Seamos otras preguntas. Sí, claro. Entonces, igual traducimos las preguntas que hayan en español, en inglés, para que las hagan en Google.
Thank you very much, and I want to premise this question, saying I know nothing about Spinoza, so it might be very dumb, and I'm kind of embarrassed to ask this question, but throughout the whole presentation, everything had to do with modes, and from what I can tell, this doesn't have to do with contemporary modal logic, vitalism, phenomenology, or existential concepts of modality, so I was wondering if you could explain a little bit what that notion of mode is, just so I can kind of get an idea of what you were talking about.
In principle, modes have nothing.
She's going to tell it also in Spanish, no? So you want.
Bueno, muchas gracias, me da mucha vergüenza porque no conozco nada de Spinoza, entonces tengo una pregunta muy sencilla y tal vez muy corta, pero lo que quería saber es hablar mucho de modos en su presentación, y lo que pasa es que a mí me parece que no tengo mucho que ver con la lógica moral, filosofía contemporánea, ni el vitalismo, fenomenología, existencialismo, entonces quería saber si me podría explicar la diferencia entre esa noción de modo en Spinoza y esa noción de modalidad o modo lógico.
Okay. Well, the term modal can mean two different things. One is related to necessity, possibility, things of that sort. And then the other one related to modes. Okay? I try to avoid the use of the term modal in the context of modes. Right? I mean, so now if you ask me, does Spinoza have a modal philosophy? I'll tell you yes, absolutely. I think he's a strict necessitarian. He does allow for possibility as long as it is epistemic, to be honest. But I think the story is complicated. Part of the complication of the story is that Spinoza is using, he's using, among other things, he's also using a notion of modality that is taken from medieval and ancient philosophy, what we call statistic modality, or if you wish, temporalized modality. Which means that necessary is that which obtains in all times, possibly that which obtains in some time, and actually is that which obtains right now. So this kind of structure, it's very similar to the structure of possible worlds, but instead of quantifying over possible worlds, you quantify over times. Now, I think that my suspicion is that you might have more than one kind of modality that is at work in Spinoza's metaphysics. It's not such, keep in mind, it's not such a great discovery, because as long as you don't have the formulation, the very elegant formulation, or when the machinery of possible worlds in Leibniz, people were speaking about necessity and possibility, and I think sometimes they had different meanings. And it's only now, I think, that we are starting to try to clarify and to see what precisely is at stake there. What precisely you mean by necessity, what precisely you mean by possibility, etc.
Okay, thank you very much. Si me permite un súper resumen de 5 minutos más o menos de la ponencia, igual para también con la misma pregunta y la respuesta que da Yitzhac. La conferencia pues iba sobre todo con una crítica, él critica que se hable de multiversos en Spinoza, y más bien lo que propone es hablar de infiversos, así de infinidad, digamos, como de versos, de esto, cada uno de ellos con su propio, digamos, un atributo dentro del cual hay pues, distintos modos dentro del atributo, y después cada uno de esos, el atributo del pensamiento tiene una idea de esos modos, pero no hay comunicación alguna entre los distintos atributos ni entre los distintos modos de los distintos atributos. Entonces ahorita la pregunta que hacía Martín y la respuesta que estaba dando Yitzhac tenía que ver precisamente con la proposición 7 del segundo libro de la ética, en donde está diciendo que no hay, bueno, que es el mismo el orden de conexión entre las ideas y las cosas, y no hay conexión entre los distintos atributos, ¿no? Entonces, lo que él está defendiendo, ¿por qué? Porque hay un personaje que se llama Schenhaus, bueno, una persona, ¿no? Que se llama Schenhaus, que dice Yitzhac que probablemente sea el amigo de Spinoza más brillante, más agudo, y es el que no se queda conforme con la respuesta que le va dando Spinoza, ¿no? Entonces le pregunta a Spinoza, oye, ¿por qué no tenemos conocimiento de los otros atributos? ¿Por qué no tenemos conocimiento de los modos de los otros atributos y solo tenemos conocimiento de la extensión y del pensamiento? Y Schenhaus le dice, pero no me respondas con una reducción al absurdo, ¿no? O sea, quiero que me respondas bien, ¿no? O sea, así. Entonces, lo que responde el mismo Spinoza a Schenhaus tampoco le convence del todo, pero lo que ha hecho Yitzhac es decirnos, bueno, una interpretación de esa respuesta, que sería como esto que acabamos de comentar. Bueno, la sustancia tiene infinitos atributos, cada uno de estos atributos tiene una infinidad de modos, cada uno de estos atributos es en sí y se concibe por sí, o sea, hay una idea para cada uno de los modos de cada uno de los atributos, pero nosotros, por ejemplo, que tenemos una mente, que la mente es la idea del cuerpo, no tenemos otra idea de otro atributo, no más que del cuerpo. Si tuviéramos idea de otro atributo, pues entonces estaría incluida ahí. Entonces solo tenemos ideas de cuerpos, ¿no? Precisamente. Entonces sería la prueba, y no hay una comunicación precisamente entre los distintos atributos. Entonces, y bueno, ponía estos distintos pasajes, ¿no? Pasajes de las cartas, pero después iba a pasajes del Tratado Breve, en donde también encuentra eso mismo, ¿no? Que está diciendo, y ponía el ejemplo del campesino, el campesino que pues puede creer que él está solo en el universo, pues él tiene sus vacas, tiene su campo y no necesita de nadie más, pero un día se le pierde una vaca y pues sale a buscar a la vaca y se encuentra con otras granjas, y entonces se da cuenta que el mundo es mucho más ancho, ¿no? De lo que él pensaba. Entonces, eso mismo, dice Spinoza en el Tratado Breve, debe estar ocurriendo, ocurre con muchos filósofos que pueden creer que nosotros estamos encerrados, que este es el único universo que hay, y que más bien de lo que se trata es, piensa Isaac, esto es también una crítica a un antropocentrismo que estaría pues pensando que todo lo que hay pues, es solamente propio del mundo humano, ¿no? Entonces, pensando en esto, en las maneras de que son los modos, estarían los modos, ¿no? Como modificaciones de la sustancia, o estaría también entender los modos como maneras, ¿no? O a la manera de esto, ¿no? Entonces, un poquito era lo que decía, ¿no? Entonces, creo que, bueno, pues igual me equivoqué, se me olvidaron cosas, entonces por ahí me ayudan, pero más o menos eso sería, y entonces un poco era la discusión. Entonces pasamos a la pregunta entonces de Silvia.
Muchas gracias. My question would be very much the same as Martin, because there is one substance, we know this, and the way you presented the notion of infiverse or multiverse is at risk of making one believe that each attribute is actually an entity in its own. And from your own writings, I know that you have a position in which attributes are only aspects of substance. So I find it a little bit odd that this paper you're presenting today somehow insists on the diversity, kind of giving each world an existence in itself, whereas it seems to me that there is one word, this is what we must remember, even from Spinoza's answer, and from your own work. So how do you combine the notion that attributes are aspects with what you just presented?
Thank you, Steve. I still insist on that there is just one world. There is one underlying reality. There is one underlying reality. Okay? But that does not mean that these aspects, I think I'll be happy that these aspects do not constitute separate realms. I think I'm reading aspect in a very ontological terms. Now, if you ask me about the attributes, are they things? Of course they are. I think that when you look there, that's a longer, it's another small, friendly disagreement that I have with Don Garrett. Don Garrett thinks that attributes are just structures. I think it's beautiful reading. I don't think it works. And the reason why it doesn't work is because Spinoza is treating attributes time and again as ontological units. He claims that the attributes have essence involving existence. Well, that seems to be pretty much in characterization of a thing. He claims that the attributes have causal powers. There are things which follow from the attributes. Right? He claims that the attributes are that the substance consists of the attributes. So if the attributes are not general items, how can substance consist of things which are mere structures? So that's why I am absolutely committed, and I thank you for pushing me on that. I am absolutely committed both to the claim that the attributes are aspects of the substance, on the one hand, but I also think that these aspects are real. They are things. They are absolutely real things. Spinoza takes them as having, a strong ontological significance.
Thank you very much. Exacto. Entonces, lo que pregunta Silian sería que en otros textos, ¿no? de Yitzhac estaría, bueno, le llama la atención que aquí esté defendiendo una diversidad, ¿no? de mundos o versos, ¿no? Esto, cuando en otros textos está defendiendo más bien una unidad, y lo que responde Yitzhac es que sigue defendiendo esa unidad, que lo que él cree es que es un error también en otras lecturas que dicen que los atributos son estructuras. Dice que suena muy interesante, pero no funciona porque él cree que los atributos son aspectos de la sustancia, pero aspectos reales que existen, que son, digamos, nosotros aquí concretos, ¿no? So, thank you very much.
Bueno, voy a hacer la pregunta en español y luego la traducción en inglés. La pregunta sería, viene en relación con la cita de Leibniz. Yo fui quien tradujo el PowerPoint. Entonces, la traducción que se hizo de Leibniz, que se supone que es la de Pollock y que utiliza la palabra mundo, ¿no? En latín utiliza la palabra hic, pero en el contexto es imposible traducirlo de otra manera que como mundo. Entonces la pregunta es, si no hasta cierto punto, en el momento en que toda la presentación desemboca acá, estamos leibniziando a Spinoza. So the question is this: in the presentation, you said that the translation of Pollock is the one that is to blame for this, the use of the word world.
The last one.
Yeah,
yes.
the last one.
Because
It is the ik in Latin. However, in this context, it is impossible to translate otherwise. That's because I did the translation you see there to Spanish, from Latin to Spanish, and in that context, the ik, in order to expose it's the better option. Okay, so the question is this one: insofar as the whole presentation comes to fruition in this analysis and in this idea, is it perhaps that we are offering a Leibnizian image of Spinoza, and onto what point? Because we can see that in Leibniz that idea is very clear, and the way he presents the ethics to Schirnhaus is perhaps more in the guise of his own thought than in the guise of Spinoza's thought. So that's the question.
So first of all, let me go to your first note, blessings on your head. My suspicion was the same, that I think that the translation is mostly right. But because because this translation is serving my purpose, and because it was not a literal translation, I just wanted to make everything clear, right? So that no one will tell me, "Oh, you use a translation that was." I agree. I think that the translation is reasonable. Usually I try to have the most literal translation in order to let the people decide by themselves. But yes, blessing also, I absolutely agree that it makes sense. Again, it's serving my purpose. Am I Leibnizianizing Spinoza? So if it were the case, then I would kind of join a whole long wagon of people who were doing that. My friend Sam Eulens is an expert in Leibnizianizing Spinoza. I think it's super interesting. So mine was someone who started and were trying to Leibnizianize Spinoza. I don't think so. Why I don't think so? Because first of all, you see that in the very early text, in the short treatise, you have already these kind of views. What you don't have in the short treatise is a strong stress on the barrier between the attributes. But other than that, the fact that there are other attributes, the other attributes have minds, and all of this, it's present already in the very early text that we have of Spinoza. Right? So that's one thing. Now, again, I think letters 63 to 66 are pretty strong. And there are my main takes. That's why. Now, there is an interesting story to be told about the discussion about the nature of worlds that is happening in the triad between Spinoza, Leibniz, and Schirnhaus. There was a beautiful article by what's the name of the scholar? He retired about 10 years ago from Texas, from Rice University. Brian Colston, yes, thank you. He wrote a beautiful article called Metaphysics of Truar, precisely on this kind of exchange. And I suspect there might be here some interesting story to be told about the development of the concept of the world in this context. But again, I didn't study that at any care.
Thank you so much. Voy a tratar como de responder la respuesta con relación a la traducción. Considero que es razonable, en la medida en que, digamos, parece que contextualmente es una buena opción, pero, digamos, como no es una traducción literal del término IC, pues lo deja como ahí, ¿no? Para que el lector decida, o la persona decida, ¿no? Con relación a la cuestión, digamos, ya de fondo, considera que no está iniciando a Spinoza en la medida en que, bueno, Sus fuentes principales son las cartas, ¿no?, de las 63 a las 66, que es este intercambio epistolar, y también el Tratado, que es un texto pues, muy de juventud y que ahí ya se encuentran como las barreras entre los diferentes atributos de los diferentes mundos. Así como que hay una rica tradición de autores que han hecho esta comparación de Leibniz con Spinoza y que han tratado como de reconvertir a Spinoza en un leibniziano de alguna manera. Hay un texto particular, sorry, I didn't catch the last name of the Rice University academic. Mark Kustad, que tiene un texto relativamente reciente con relación, digamos, a el intercambio que existe, ¿no?, entre Schellhaus, Leibniz y cómo es que esto tiene algún trasfondo metafísico o en la metafísica de Spinoza.
And this article appeared in a text called Spinoza Metaphysical Themes, 2003, John Villoro, and Holy Testament, and the word Leibniz.
It's nice article. Okay, thank you so much.
Gracias, doctor Melamed. Hay una carta de Oldenburg a Spinoza, donde le pregunta si cada infinito en su género, la definición 6 de la ética, no se refiere a ese pasaje de la ética, si el infinito en su género no es por sí mismo un Dios cada uno. Y parece inevitable que la salida de Spinoza a esta cuestión, o sea, la infinita diversidad de las expresiones de las perfecciones de Dios, de sus atributos, cómo no pueden convertirse en un Dios en cada uno. La solución parece inevitablemente leibniziana, es decir, acudir al término expresión como garantía de unidad de todo lo infinito que constituye a Dios. Parece inevitable volver leibniziano a Spinoza si queremos conciliar el tema de lo diverso con lo uno.
Okay. So what Victor is asking is he's recalling a letter from Oldenburg to Spinoza, where Oldenburg says that any infinite in itself, if it's not a God, no, and each one of these infinite in itself. And so if that's what, if that is the problem, the solution looks like a Leibnizian solution, and call here the term expression, no, and say that everything is expression from God, no. So he's asking his question.
Which letter precisely do you remember?
I don't know, but the first letters.
And in the first letters from Oldenburg to Spinoza,
The first letters from
Oldenburg
is letter 2, actually.
Sí.
But that's very, very early.
Since 61.
Yeah. I don't recall that. I need to look at the text, and then I don't want to say anything before I have the text before my eyes, and just to give you a proper answer. With regard to expression, yes, it's a super important term. All I can say is that I think that we still do not have a good understanding of what extraordinary is for Spinoza. The main question is, of course, when you look at the kind of relata that are expressing each other, and Spinoza is using the term in many, many different contexts. It's extremely difficult to find a univocal sense for all of these contexts. There are attempts, but I can tell you that just, I read the latest book. I didn't come with an answer to that question, to be honest.
Entonces, bueno, sí, el concepto de expresión es muy importante para Spinoza, pero también es un poco ambiguo en cuanto a que está presente en muchos contextos usado de distinta manera, entonces que todavía no se tiene una idea como muy clara de qué es lo que está diciendo, que le ayudaría mucho saber cuál es la carta para poderlo ver con más cuidado.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
I would like to know, I don't know if it's Leibniz or in your presentation, it suggested that the relationship between the attribute of thought and extension would be the parameter of the relationship in the other infinite attributes. And that's fascinating for me, but I don't know why it should be so.
Thank you. So, good question. So, I think that it is presented, exactly as you pointed out, it is presented as such by Schuller in letter 63 to Spinoza. So he's thinking that in the same way that extension and thought are related to each other, all the other attributes are related to thought in a similar way. So let me show you letter 63. So here it is here in English or in Spanish. Why it bothers you? Well, there is a very simple reason why it bothers you, because on the one hand, thought is supposed to be an attribute that represents all of the attributes. On the other hand, it's supposed to be isomorphic. It's supposed to be of the same size as any attribute. Right? So, and the immediate question is, how can the same thought be, on the one hand, be isomorphic with all of the attribute, on the other hand, be just like another attribute, right? In a way, in the same size, if you wish. I mean, I'm taking the term size here. It's a gross term, I agree, but I'm taking the term size here from Jim's. And this question actually was one of the reasons why I wrote my first book. And my argument, which I developed in chapter 6, is that what you have in Spinoza is indeed that thought is not numerically richer than another attribute in terms of the isomorphism between modes of thought and modes of other attributes. But I think that modes of thought are infinitely faceted. That's the claim I'm arguing for. So that infinite many aspects of one and the same idea allow the same mode of thought to represent infinite many attributes, so that each aspect of an idea represents a mode under a different attribute. I develop it I think, in quite great detail in this chapter 6, but I'll be happy to discuss it. Or if you have questions, I'm happy to answer.
Bueno, se preguntó por qué razón o de qué medida la relación del pensamiento con la extensión sería como la medida de la relación de los demás atributos, ¿no? Y la respuesta de Yitzhac fue que, sobre todo, la que pone en función de la carta 63, en la que el pensamiento estaría representando a los otros atributos, y sin embargo debería ser del mismo tamaño, y utiliza enfatizando mucho el tamaño, y también debe tener esta propiedad de isomorfismo, isomórfico. Entonces, comenta esta cuestión, me saltó en el capítulo 6 de su primer libro, en el que está que, bueno, que no se hace la cuestión. Dice, el pensamiento no puede ser numéricamente más rico, más grande que los demás atributos, por lo tanto debe ser más rico en otro sentido, y es que los modos del pensamiento tienen infinitas facetas, y cada aspecto de cada idea estaría representando un modo y un atributo diferente, haciendo sin embargo que sea numéricamente idéntico e isomórfico, pero al mismo tiempo siendo capaz de representar a los atributos los diferentes modos de los diferentes atributos a partir de los diferentes aspectos de la misma idea.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. I have 2 comments. The first is that I think that the expression of infinite parallel universe is kind of unfortunate because the conceptual charge it comes with, because it is usually used in discussion about how the world might have been, and it is well known that Spinoza is a necessitarian. Everything is necessary. So I really enjoyed the presentation, but I think that maybe there could be a better term. The second is that I kind of feel that I am sympathetic with Schoenhaus because the knowledge of other attributes is kind of important in the Spinoza's philosophy. Indeed, he was arguing against Descartes on how the mind knows itself, because Descartes believed that the mind has its better knowledge by knowing only itself. And in Ethics, second part, proposition 28, Spinoza states that the idea of the affections of the body, of the human body, insofar they refer only to human mind, are not clear and distinct, but confused. So we have a clearer idea of how mind works because our understanding of how human body works. Thus, a knowledge of other attributes may help us in understanding how our mind works. And not knowing what other attributes there are, it's kind of frustrating, indeed. In Ethics, for part proposition 18, Scholium, he also states that our understanding would be imperfect if mind would be alone and wouldn't understand anything as besides it. So the knowledge of other attributes is kind of important in Spinoza philosophy of mind. So not being able to know what other attributes there are, it's kind of frustrating. I understand the conclusion that Spinoza takes by the end of his philosophy, but I kind of sympathetic with Schoenhaus. Frustration, it's skepticism.
Thank you. What's your name?
Juan Carlos.
Carlos?
Carlos. Charles.
Okay. So, let me first of all respond to the first point. We agree on most issues. I mean, I'm also I read Spinoza as a strict necessitarian, no question. Again, I think that there are possibilities in Spinoza more in the context of, in epistemic context rather than anything else. All this being said, I think that when we're speaking about plurality of worlds, I do not assume that there are possible worlds. I stressed that at the beginning. They are fully actual. In fact, they are fully necessary. So all of these other worlds, other attributes, they are not possible. They are necessary. They are absolutely necessary. So I'll stress that. Frustration is fine. I mean, I can share the frustration. But you know, I think one of the things that I learned from Spinoza is to try to tame down a little bit some of your expectation. The assumption that the world is created for you is a bit childish. The world has no purpose. It was not created for me. It was not created for anyone else. It was not created for human beings. And yes, I mean, there are things which go beyond human knowledge. I think that's one of the most deep insights of Spinoza, and I think that it's an insight that puts him in a very interesting contrast to Kant. Human perspective is nice, it's not constituting what the world is. I appreciate that. I mean, so yes, I think perhaps it's first what you get is a frustration, and then at some point you say,
no, it's okay, it's fine.
Think about what happened. I mean, yeah.
Bueno, la pregunta de Juan Carlos fueron dos comentarios. El primero tiene que ver con la expresión, ¿no?, de mundos posibles, o pluralidad de los mundos, cómo esta tiene una carga teórica hacia justo la posibilidad, y en Spinoza eso contrasta con el necesitarismo estricto, ¿no?, que acompaña a Spinoza. Y bueno, el segundo comentario viene a colación con Shearhouse y cómo él comparte la frustración que este parece tener con relación específicamente a cómo la comprensión de otros atributos nos ayudaría a entender pues un poco más a los, por ejemplo, el cuerpo. Entonces para ello cita Ética 2, proposición 28, y también cita Ética 4, proposición 18 escolar, ¿no?, en la que habla acerca de la dificultad de comprender, o más bien la facilidad de comprenderse que tendría la mente humana si solamente se tuviera que entender a sí misma y no a los otros modos, ¿no? Y bueno, la respuesta de Yitzhac es que, bueno, comparte el punto de que su lectura es de que Spinoza es un estricto, ¿no?, y de que, por otro lado, ahí es donde empieza el elemento, ¿no? Por eso es que Yitzhac clarifica desde el principio que pluralidad de los mundos no significa mundos posibles, sino mundos actuales y necesarios, ¿no? Porque eso va de conformidad con la propuesta spinoziana. En segundo lugar, que la frustración está bien y que, en cierto sentido, uno de los gestos más importantes de la filosofía de Spinoza es que nos hace modular las expectativas a partir de reconocer que el mundo no está hecho para nosotros, que no tiene una finalidad, que no tiene un sentido y que la perspectiva humana es una entre las posibilidades de observar el mundo, y que, bueno, en ese sentido estaría contrapuesto con Kant, que no tiene esta perspectiva más central o antropocéntrica, podríamos decirlo.
No, ahí está, tienes. Sí.
Bueno, thank you very much for your presentation. Voy a hacerlo en castellano porque para que quede más claro y traduzca mejor. En relación a la frustración de sabernos modos finitos, que hay un montón de, bueno, esta posibilidad de que haya mundos paralelos, infinitos también. A la vez pienso que en la medida en que el orden y la conexión de las causas y los efectos es siempre la misma en todos los atributos, si yo soy causa en este atributo, bueno, en los dos atributos, ¿no?, en tanto cuerpo, soy causa en la extensión y por lo tanto, en tanto idea, soy causa de otras ideas, siento que esto se replicaría al infinito en todos los puntos infinitos, con lo cual es muy potente, no es tan frustrante, ¿no? O sea, bien simultáneo, cada vez que yo soy causa adecuada o inadecuada de efectos, se replicaría esa cadena causal simultáneamente, pero desde la duración, o sea, desde la perspectiva de la duración por lo menos, infinitamente. O sea, y también a la vez no queda tanto por fuera de nuestro conocimiento. O sea, en realidad podemos conocer, la medida que podamos conocer. Estoy haciendo la pregunta. La pregunta sería si entonces la cadena de causas y efectos se replicaría o se multiplicaría al infinito de los infinitos mundos de la misma manera, simultáneamente, por lo menos desde la perspectiva de la duración, porque, bueno, la perspectiva de la también podríamos discutir.
Okay. Si quieres bueno. Pero sobre eso, digamos, para agregarle justo a la pregunta de ella.
Sí, claro. No. The translation is this. The possibility of many words or many parallel words in the different attributes is clear. You have stated that. However, insofar as we can see that for Spinoza, the same order and connection of things and ideas, and it's not only in the attributes of thought and extension, but also in all the infinite attributes. One could say that there is a causal connection, as one can be the cause of something in extension as being a body, and one could also be at the same time the cause of something in thought as an idea. So one could say that this same order replicates among all the other attributes, among all the other parallel worlds, and therefore the causal chain will replicate infinitely in all different attributes. And from that point of view, she doesn't understand the frustration, because she would think that not all is outside knowledge, it's inside knowledge, for we can know the cause, or the causal chain of bodies, the causal chain of ideas, and that with the same causal chain, other imaginable attributes and worlds. So the question is, isn't it the case that this infinite chain of, or this same order and connection would actually replicate in all the attributes, and therefore we could have a more adequate knowledge of the causes and the order of the other infinite attributes?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with everything you said. Absolutely. Just to be clear, we do know some people call trans-attribute features, but yes, the idea that most of the third attribute are ordered in certain causal order. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. There are all kinds of other features that we can know. So I do know, for example, about the third attribute, which God knows what it is, but I do know that it involves existence. In that sense, I know that it is not a Cartesian attribute. Cartesian attributes do not involve existence. It's a status attribute. It involves existence. So, but what it is, I have no idea. So I agree, we know some features which are generally features of attributes, or generally features of the order within each attribute, such as causal order, and I will venture to say that if there are features which supervene on the causal order, they might as well be replicated in all of the attributes. So, for example, I'm not sure about that, but it's possible that Spinoza's mereology supervenes on causation. I'm not sure about that. I mean, it's some possibility that I consider that the relation of parts of whole might be closely related to causal structures. If it is the case, then it's not only that I know that the causal structure will be replicated, will be the same in the attribute of thought, in the third attribute and fourth attribute, I might know even that some mereological relationship, insofar as they supervene on causal relationship, might be replicated as well. Okay. But essentially, I absolutely agree. Yes.
Pues en resumen dice que está totalmente de acuerdo y que los atributos se van a reflejar en todos los universos.
Sí, el orden causal entonces sería el mismo y estaría sucediendo lo mismo. Y hay otra pregunta, porque quería justo meterme aquí también muy rápido. Y bueno, preguntarle a Yitzhac, precisamente, esto es un poco como también que sucedía con los estoicos, ¿no? Recuerdan ustedes este eterno retorno de la conflagración y todo volvió a empezar, porque luego ellos tenían esta discusión acerca de si una persona, o sea, tiene algo en su rostro que afecta a ese orden causal, entonces ese algo que tiene una marca, una mancha, no sé, un grano, eso también está en el siguiente orden, pero lo que no afecta no está, ¿no? Sorry, I'm just making a follow. And I recall also, because what you said, no, then we will know nothing about what happens in the other attributes of the other worlds, not from that point of view, but at least we could know that there's the same order and connection, no? So
the causal order.
Exactly. So, and then we can recall here the eternal return of the Stoics, no? In the sense that they had this discussion of what intervenes in each cause to cause any effects. So that thing has to be there when it gets to the next world, not that when you get the great conflagration, and then everything starts up and goes again, and then again it will be so it will be like a discussion.
So, Luis, my knowledge of the Stoics is extremely limited, so I don't want to say anything which I'm not an expert on. what if I'm better than anything. But what I do want to say is yes, there is no question that the third attribute, there is no violation of determinism. There is no violation, I think, of strict causal order of force.
Okay. Entonces, ese tercer, cuarto, quinto atributo, todos los que fueran, no había una violación acerca del determinismo, pero un deseo de causas de pasos. Entonces, había otra pregunta, sí, por acá, ¿verdad? Y yo creo que ya estamos, pero si no, si no lo resulta, luego la pregunta.
Primero que nada, gracias. Yo voy a confiar en la traducción porque me tropiezo al expresarme en inglés. Entonces, ha sido muy divertido seguir su ponencia, a pesar de ser un estudiante de licenciatura. Admito que no fue fácil, pero me divertí. Especialmente en este momento en el que tiene este comentario usted de "That's not philosophy, that's statement", cuando justo estaba esta diapositiva. Y a decir verdad, me tropecé en el esfuerzo de comprender lo que implica en la siguiente diapositiva lo que es E2, P13 y que por lo que entiendo tiene referencia en E2 a 5. No sé si me pudiera apoyar ahí a aclararme cómo es que no se da ese desajuste.
So she's really thankful for your talk, and she says that she enjoyed it very, very much. And she's asking if you can say more about Proposition 13, and also the Axiom 5, in part 2, of the ethics. This is part 2.
13 is, okay, I'll begin with Proposition 13. 13 is long. I mean, this column is basically the entire physical digression. But what Spinoza is very concerned that the mind might not represent the body, or perhaps represent the body and something else. And previous commentators were asking themselves, what does he have in mind? Perhaps he thinks that it will represent the body and also another body, or an elephant body or something like that. I don't think that's at all what is at stake, at least not primarily. Because once Spinoza refers to Axiom 5, part 2, which we all claim we cannot know anything other than modes of extension of thought, the primary, at least the primary, probably the only concern with this proposition is really in a mix-up in which the human mind will represent the mode of a different attribute instead of my body. Now, with regard to Axiom 5, Axiom 5 is saying that we simply we do not sense, we do not know any modes other than the attribute modes of the thought of extension. It's an interesting claim. I mean, I think an axiom generally is something which you can take it as an admission of my limits, my epistemic limits, my ability to extend till this way, here I begin. And all I'm saying is that we can improve that. In fact, Spinoza improved that himself. I mean, I think what he's giving in letter 66 is precisely what could be a proof that will replace Axiom 5 and turn it into a proposition. Right? For Spinoza, the difference between axioms and definitions are the definitions, both of them are eternal truths, but definitions are referring to essences. Axioms are more broadly. I think the same also would be true about propositions. For Spinoza, I think they don't think that these propositions are necessarily, in a way, eternal truth. The only thing is that they were improved. I suggest that, we can keep on working on the ethics. And some axioms can turn into propositions. Just work a little bit more, think harder. There are some resources to do that. I can show you one place where you can see the process of axioms turning into propositions is if you compare the first appendix to the short treatise, to the beginning of ethics, and you see that many of the propositions of ethics appear as axioms in the first appendix. At some point, Spinoza understands that, well, if you have definitions in your, if you have a better machinery, conceptual machinery that includes also definitions, axioms can become propositions right now. So, okay? And I think it's an infinite process. I mean, at least for me, I mean, and that's, you know, it's, you can improve that.
Pues, bueno, muchísimas gracias. Bueno, sería que podemos nosotros mejorar incluso la ética, ¿no? Y pensar en pasajes como ese, como el axioma 5 del segundo libro de la ética, que en la epístola 66 nos está diciendo que debe ser una proposición, ¿no? Y entonces dice cómo hay axiomas y ya después se vuelven proposiciones y así. Y el 13, el escolio de la proposición 13 del segundo libro, pues es la física spinoziana, ¿no? Y entonces lo que me interesa mucho también de esos pasajes es que no hay conexiones entre, o causales entre ideas y cosas. Pues muy bien, ya con eso, ¿verdad? Terminamos, porque ahora sí estamos en tiempo. Entonces, so thank you.